recently, my former Congresswoman, Elissa Slotkin, now the junior senator from Michigan, appeared on the YouTube show Breaking Points. I think that mostly it got attention because of the way that Crystal in particular grilled her on Gaza and her votes on that, and to a certain extent, some of the questions that she was asked about her failure to endorse Zoran Mamdani and kind of her strange excuses for that. But I want to focus on something else. I want to focus on what happened at the beginning of that interview, if we have the clip.
Joining us now is Senator Elissa Slotkin of Michigan. Senator, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
We have a very limited amount of time. This is the internet, so you're here, and it's important that we ask some of the questions that are animating some of the younger voters and others. I assume that's part of the reason that you're here. The first is about Jeffrey Epstein. It's a story that's really captured a lot of America's interest. So you're a former CIA officer. Do you think that Jeffrey Epstein had any connections to U.S. or Israeli intelligence agencies?
So, not that I've ever seen or heard, but there's No, I haven't asked. But you know, this is like a solvable question because President Trump's CIA director, John Radcliffe, can answer this question, right? There is no shortage of people in this administration who can answer that question. I would be very surprised. I'm going to be honest. I know your views on it. I would be surprised.
Okay.
But I'm like a Middle East analyst. I was doing my time going after terrorist groups and militias in Iraq. And so I never saw it. I never heard anything about that. I, again, would be surprised, but there's an easy way to solve that problem.
Well, that's the question then. So in terms of, because I know you've expressed some concern about classified information, et cetera, in the past, would you be fine then with the full release of these Trump Epstein files, even if they did reveal an intelligence connection?
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point, like, it's such a distraction from, in my mind, like what I really care about, which is helping people like live well in Michigan. Just get it over with and get it out. And this wasn't like my issue. It's still not the thing that wakes me up in the morning and I want to work on. But I think it's okay to say it's a full distraction now in Washington. Everyone's talking about it. So just unveil it, do whatever you need to do, answer the questions, and move past it.
Well, that's the last question then. So there's some accusations here from the Republicans on Epstein here, just about, why didn't you care for over 4 years? I know you asked the question in 2020. You said, I don't care particularly about Bill Clinton, et cetera. I mean, that's somewhat understandable, but, we do have a person, very specific circumstances, let alone, the sex trafficking organization, others. So, why don't you answer that question? Like, why is this now is the time that you do care?
Yeah,
I mean, not particularly care.
It's horrible when you have a pedophile and someone who had a literal pyramid scheme of recruiting 14 and 15-year-old girls for illegal sex. I mean, it's horrible. At the time, I mean, I sort of saw it as like one of these horrible stories that comes out every 5 months, about somebody. I think the Weinstein thing had happened. There weren't Michiganders, to my knowledge, who were involved, women, young girls who were involved. So I kind of saw it as like a horrible moment, but not particularly something that's like going to decide whether someone in my state can buy a house or get a good job. So to me, it was just like it wasn't like a strategic issue, right, for me. And then now it just is like grown. And I think there is a difference between saying some rich guy or a former politician was named in those things versus the president of the United States.
And I have to say, I suspect that, other than maybe that it sounded a little bit of evasive, most viewers in most places probably didn't think much one way or the other of that part of the interview. But I have to say, I was pretty shocked by that statement about no Michiganders being involved, because I know for a fact that that's not true. Now, it might be true in a very narrow, literalistic way, that perhaps none of the victims were from Michigan, like they grew up there. That might be true. It's probably true that nobody who's directly involved as a perpetrator was from Michigan. But the implication there's no Michigan connection is just wrong. As it happens, Jeffrey Epstein was a significant donor to Interlochen Arts Camp in northern Michigan, which Epstein himself attended as a teenager in the late 60s. In the 90s, and I think maybe even going into the 2000s, but certainly in the 90s. Epstein was a major donor to Interlochen. They had a scholarship cabin named after him. And he met at least one of his victims there at the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, right? His longtime girlfriend and co-conspirator and direct participant in the abuse, according to multiple accounts, and the only person who's been convicted of crimes in connection to this, a woman identified as Jane Doe number 3 in the court records, said, I think we actually have the graphic of the Interlochen statement on this, now the Interlochen one. So it says, this is the statement that the camp issued in December 2021. It said, earlier this week, a Jane Doe testified at the Ghislaine Maxwell trial that she met Jeffrey Epstein and Maxwell in between classes at Interlochen Arts Camp in the early 90s while she was having ice cream with friends. The pair stopped to talk to her. She alleges that upon returning home to Florida from camp, her mother and she visited Epstein and Maxwell, after which began a period of grooming and later sexual abuse. And they go on to say that the abuse didn't happen at the camp itself, which I expect is true. But it really struck me that this is a pretty basic thing for the senator, one of the 2 senators from the state, not to know about this scandal. Now, I think I can understand that this is probably more on my radar than it would be a lot of other people, even in Michigan. I worked at Interlochen, about a decade after the time that Epstein and Maxwell were grooming Jane Doe number 3 there. But, my late teens and early 20s, I worked at the camp a couple summers, several summers, really. My sister worked there. One of my best friends from high school worked there. And so, of course, when the Epstein Interlochen stuff came up, there was a fair amount of, oh my God, did you hear about this? But I think that for a senator from Michigan to apparently not know about this, either she was being hyper literalistic in the way that she put that, or she genuinely doesn't know. And I think either option is bad. I think if she was being that literalistic, then I think it's pretty misleading. I think that if she did mean it, that if she just genuinely didn't know that there was some sort of Michigan connection to what Epstein was doing, then I think that bespeaks a lack of curiosity about a case that's implicated as many elite figures as this one, that I find kind of disturbing in itself. And I think it says something about the dynamics of this case. That later in the interview, right, she does call for the Epstein files that the federal government has to be released now. And she took the opportunity to strongly suggest that Donald Trump doesn't want to release them because the information in them would be damaging him. And of course, she's not wrong about that. We'll get to that. But her explanation of why Trump didn't want to release them does raise a pretty obvious question. Why didn't Joe Biden ever release them? Why did Democrats ignore this case so thoroughly for years, to the point where they, you have prominent Democrats like Elissa Slotkin, who delivered the Democratic response to Trump's State of the Union, who, let's say for the sake of argument, literally don't even know the relationship between their own states and this case, only to come alive midway through 2025, right? 6 years after Epstein, let's say for the sake of argument, killed himself. And conversely, why is it that Republicans who screamed their heads off about Epstein for years have suddenly gone quiet, right? Insisting that there's nothing to see here. And, I wrote an article about this for Jacobin called The Jeffrey Epstein Scandal is a Stain on Both Parties, when I was actually Megan, our guest tonight, who edited it. When we were going over the edits, we both agreed that the best possible title for this article would be These Sick Fucks. But, probably Jacobin, didn't go for that. So we've got The Jeffrey Epstein Scandal is a Stain on Both Parties. And one of the things that I point out here is, of course, there are a lot of contested facts about this case, right? So there are at least 2 Epstein accusers who claimed, right? One of them is no longer with us, to have been sort of funneled by Epstein and Maxwell to be abused by other people. There's a woman who came forward in 2016 and said she was raped by Donald Trump at an Epstein party. And there's Virginia Giuffre, who said that she was trafficked to be abused by other prominent figures. She included Alan Dershowitz and Prince Andrew, both of whom have admitted to traveling to Epstein's private island, although they deny the sexual abuse, of course. Dershowitz memorably claimed that he did get a massage while he was on the island, but he kept his underwear on. He made a big point of saying that. So conclude from that what you will. We also know, of course, the publicly available flight logs from Epstein's private Boeing 747 includes Trump, Bill Clinton, Bill Gates, Al Gore, Kevin Spacey, Leonardo DiCaprio, and other prominent figures in the same ilk. And that locals in the Virgin Islands referred to the plane as the Lolita Express because there were so often underage girls or girls who looked underage who were on board. And kind of the core point that I was making about this is, even if you accept, for the sake of argument, that nobody else besides Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were involved in any of this abuse, right? That was it. Those are the only people who are guilty. It remains true that, there's a pretty obvious explanation for why Joe Biden never released the files. Bill Clinton is still a major figure in the Democratic Party. He spoke at the DNC last year. He campaigned for Harris in swing states. And Donald Trump has an even more obvious motive, as becomes obvious when you look at, for example, the Wall Street Journal report, which includes Trump's notorious birthday letter for Jeffrey Epstein's 50th birthday, which we do have the graphic of, where they talk about their shared, how they have certain things in common, and how every day will be a wonderful secret. Takes the form of a fictional dialogue between the two, voiceover. There must be more to life than having everything. Donald, yes, there is, but I won't tell you what it is. Jeffrey, nor will I, since I also know what it is. Donald, we have certain things in common, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, yes, we do, come to think of it. Donald, enigmas never aged. Have you noticed that? Jeffrey, as a matter of fact, it was clear to me the last time I saw you. Donald, a pal is a wonderful thing to have. Happy birthday. May every day be a wonderful secret. Now, whatever you think they were referring to there, and yet, of course, Trump claims it's fake. That seems extremely unlikely, since the Wall Street Journal would have known for 100% certain that he was going to sue them when this came out. He's extremely lawsuit happy. He sues everybody, and so they would have had every incentive to check and double check and triple check the authenticity of this document, which, by the way, was written in, was typed up inside of a drawing of a naked woman, and I'm going to quote the Wall Street Journal here, and the future president's signature is a squiggly Donald below her waist, mimicking pubic hair. And so, certainly whatever else you want to say about this, it seems clear based on what's public that even if you think they're completely innocent of participation in the actual abuse, both Bill Clinton, for example, and Donald Trump stand to be extremely embarrassed if more Epstein information became public. That much, I think, is hard to seriously dispute. And, certainly you have other people in that list I rattled off earlier who are important political donors, et cetera. So I think the incentives not to release it, whatever you think is true about the rest of this, are fairly clear. And in the Trump administration case, it's particularly ridiculous because you've gotten these dramatic flip-flops, right? So I think we have a couple of old tweets from J.D. Vance, now Vice President of the United States. So this one is from 2021, right? So when Biden was president, says, remember when we learned that our wealthiest and most powerful people were connected to a guy who ran a literal child sex trafficking ring? And then that guy mysteriously died in jail, and now we just don't talk about it. Yeah, remember that. We've got another Vance tweet where he says that we might not have this one. He says, what possible interest would the U.S. government have in keeping Epstein's clients secret? Oh, now, of course, you might say there are no Epstein clients because that assumes this narrative about him blackmailing some of these other people, and maybe you think that's not true. But of course, Trump's Attorney General, Pam Bondi, literally claimed that there was a client list. In fact, she claimed that it was on her desk waiting to be reviewed. And then they flip-flopped and said that there was not a client list. In fact, back in February, the administration made a show of giving more than a dozen right-wing influencers binders labeled the Epstein Files Phase 1. They didn't really have any new information in them. Yep, there are the binders. But Bondi defended, the sort of significance of releasing it by saying that whereas the information in the files had previously been leaked, it had never been, and I quote, released in an official capacity by the US government. But then there's never been a phase 2 that would actually have new information. They did the phase 1, they made a big show of phase 1, but no phase 2. And Donald Trump, who continues to insist that Bondi is doing a fantastic job, and everybody should stop criticizing her, has actually taken to pretty explicitly saying that some of the information in the unreleased files is indeed about him. The rest of us don't get to see what it says, but he's taken to implying, at least the admission that it is about him, but saying that it's fake and a hoax. But of course, we don't know what the content is of this alleged hoax. And the last thing I want to say about this, right, before we wrap up and bring Megan on, is just this. Over the course of the last decade, everything in American politics tends to be sucked into the one central vortex of pro-Trump versus anti-Trump, right? So in this case, Democratic partisans and never Trump conservatives never, by and large, never called on Biden to release the files, but now they're loudly demanding that Trump release them. While conversely, many Trump loyalists, including people like Kash Patel, Trump's FBI director, Dan Bongino, however you say that, his assistant FBI director, J.D. Vance, as we talked about earlier, spent years talking nonstop about Epstein. And now, of course, they've changed their tune, said there's no conspiracy to see here. And I think it's a real mistake to just let this be defined entirely by that pro-Trump versus anti-Trump matrix. That matters. I think Trump is a dangerous authoritarian, but I also think the significance of the scandal transcends partisan divides. I also think it would be a mistake, however tempting it might be for some people who I generally agree with about a lot of things, to dismiss the whole thing as distraction from bread and butter issues. I actually think this should be seen as a profoundly disturbing symptom of our incredibly materially unequal society. Because look, think about some of the disputed matters of fact. Was Epstein linked to either American or foreign intelligence, as lots of people have speculated and brought up circumstantial evidence for? Was he blackmailing anybody? Did he in fact kill himself? I'll admit to being pretty curious about those. I regard some of these as open questions, given the information that we have right now. But let's just go ahead and stipulate for the sake of argument, the answer to all three questions is no. Fine. Even when these issues are taken off the table, here's what we're left with. We live in a society where a single oligarch can buy his own island. That's the level of economic inequality we have. He can buy a personal Boeing 727 to fly himself and his guests back and forth from that island. He can sound very plausible, right? When he tells teenage girls that he's in a position to make all their dreams come true. He can surround himself with people like Bill Clinton and Donald Trump and, A-list celebrities. And, when you think about one of the most disturbing details about the entire scandal, right? That he was arrested the first time in 2008, convicted, right? Or at least, he accepted a plea deal. And when people are accused of the kinds of crimes that Jeffrey Epstein is accused of, that just completely destroys their life normally. But in his case, Alan Dershowitz negotiated the sweetheart deal for him, where he served a little over a year, one, in county jail, and was able to come and go from his jail cell all the time for work release, because apparently, he didn't have quite enough money yet. And if you think that he was connected to intelligence of some kind, and that strings were pulled that way to get him that deal, then it's a scandal in one way. But let's just assume for the sake of argument that he wasn't. Then it's a scandal in a completely different way. In fact, in some ways, it's worse. It just means that he was on the very tippy top of the hierarchy of a wildly materially unequal society. And so normal laws don't apply to him in the same way. If not for the subsequent years of work by investigative journalists, authorities might have never been shamed into reopening the case. And whatever else is true, right? I say at the end of the article, these uncontested facts are enough to make the scandal a really disturbing window into what's wrong with our social order. And much worse might be waiting to be revealed. We just don't know yet. Either way, it's pretty bad, but I don't think this is a distraction. I actually think you should be very mad about the fact that this much is still being kept from us, and we should absolutely have a right to know. You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive postgames on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.